In the mountains of Afghanistan, death whispers through every shadow. For Navy SEALs, courage isn't just expected. It's the thin line between coming home and becoming another name on a memorial wall. But what happens when the most dangerous mission of your life depends not on your training, your weapons, or your team, but on a single sniper whose identity you don't even know? This is the story of Lieutenant Sarah Chun, a woman whose deadly precision would rewrite the rules of modern warfare. In a world where female soldiers weren't supposed to exist on the front lines, she became the ghost in the mountains, the unseen guardian angel who could put a bullet through a target's eye from over a mile away. When Alpha Team found themselves surrounded by 30 Taliban fighters in a kill zone with no way out, they had no idea that their salvation would come from someone the military officially said wasn't there. Someone whose very existence challenged everything the brass thought they knew about women in combat. This isn't just a war story. This is the account of how one woman's impossible shots turned a certain massacre into a legend that Special Forces operators still whisper about in the corridors of power. It's about the moment when skill met desperation, when precision met chaos, and when a sniper who wasn't supposed to exist became the only thing standing between 8 Navy SEALs and certain death. The mountains don't care about politics. Bullets don't discriminate based on gender. And when you're staring down the scope of a rifle with 30 enemies closing in on your brothers in arms, the only thing that matters is whether you can make the shot that saves their lives. Sarah Chun could make that shot. She could make it 30 times if necessary. This is her story. The morning mist clung to the Afghan mountains like a shroud, and Lieutenant Sarah Chun knew it would be her best friend or her worst enemy before the sun reached its peak. She adjusted her position behind the boulder, her Barrett M82 sniper rifle steady against the rocky outcrop. 800 meters below, Alpha Team was moving through the valley like ghosts in the pre-dawn darkness. Sarah had been tracking this mission for 3 days. Officially, she wasn't here. According to every piece of paperwork that mattered, Lieutenant Sarah Chun was back at Bagram Air Base, filing reports and maintaining equipment. The reality was far different. She was what the special operations community called a ghost asset, a sniper so skilled that her services were quietly requested for the most impossible missions, regardless of official policy about women in combat roles. Through her scope, she watched Lieutenant Marcus Webb lead his 7-man SEAL team through the treacherous terrain. Webb was a good officer, the kind of leader who brought his people home. His team trusted him completely, and Sarah respected that kind of leadership. She'd been watching over Webb's missions for 6 months now, though he had no idea she existed. The Taliban had been using this valley as a supply route for weapons flowing in for Pakistan. Intelligence suggested a high-value target would be moving through today, a bomb maker responsible for killing dozens of coalition forces. Webb's mission was simple on paper: intercept, capture, and extract. But nothing in Afghanistan was ever simple. Sarah's radio crackled softly in her earpiece. "Overwatch, this is Alpha Leader," Webb's voice whispered through the static. "Moving to checkpoint 1. No contact yet." She couldn't respond directly. Her existence was classified beyond top secret, but she could watch. Through her scope, she tracked each member of Alpha Team as they moved with practiced precision through the rocky terrain. Staff Sergeant Mike Torres took point, his movements fluid and careful. Behind him, Petty Officer First Class David Kim scanned the high ground, his rifle ready. The rest of the team spread out in a tactical formation that would have made their instructors proud. Sarah had grown up in Seattle, the daughter of Taiwanese immigrants who'd built a successful engineering firm from nothing. They'd expected her to follow in their footsteps, perhaps become a doctor or lawyer. Instead, she'd shocked them by enlisting in the Army at 18. What they didn't know was that she'd been shooting competitively since she was 12, and by 16, she could put 5 rounds through a silver dollar at 300 yards. The Army had recognized her talent immediately. After basic training, they fast-tracked her through sniper school, where she'd broken records that had stood for 20 years. Her instructors called her a once-in-a-generation shooter. Her fellow soldiers called her the Ghost because she could disappear into any terrain and emerge to take impossible shots. But being the best female sniper in the military came with complications. Official policy kept women out of direct combat roles, which meant Sarah's extraordinary abilities were often underutilized. That changed when a general with stars on his shoulders and pragmatism in his heart decided that saving American lives mattered more than paperwork. Sarah became his secret weapon, deployed unofficially to provide overwatch for the most dangerous missions. Through her scope, Sarah noticed something that made her blood run cold. On the ridge opposite her position, nearly 1,200 meters away, she caught the glint of metal. Someone else was watching Alpha Team, and they weren't friendly. She adjusted her scope and felt her heart rate slow as her training kicked in. There, a Taliban spotter with a radio, directing someone she couldn't see yet. Sarah's mind raced through the tactical situation. Alpha Team was approaching a natural choke point in the valley, a narrow passage between two steep ridges. It was perfect terrain for an ambush, and she was beginning to understand that Webb's team was walking into a trap. She shifted her position slightly, scanning the high ground with methodical precision. The morning mist was starting to lift, and what she saw made her stomach tighten. This wasn't just one or two fighters. Taliban positions were scattered across multiple ridges, at least 20 fighters that she could identify, probably more hidden in the rocks. Someone had planned this carefully. Alpha Team had no idea they were about to walk into a kill zone designed specifically for them. Sarah's training warred with her orders. She was supposed to observe and report, nothing more. But there was no time to call for backup, no time to warn Webb through official channels. In less than 10 minutes, Alpha Team would be in the middle of the ambush, and 8 good men would die. She made her decision. Sarah's first shot took the Taliban spotter in the head from 1,200 meters, the sound of her rifle echoing off the mountain walls like thunder. She'd given up any pretense of staying hidden, but she'd also bought Alpha Team precious seconds of confusion among their enemies. Contact, contact! Webb's voice exploded over the radio as Taliban fighters opened fire from multiple positions. We're taking fire from the ridgeline. Sarah was already acquiring her second target when she heard Webb's tactical assessment. This is Alpha Leader. We've got at least 20 hostiles, multiple positions, requesting immediate air support. But Sarah knew what Webb didn't. Air support was 20 minutes away at minimum, and Alpha Team didn't have 20 minutes. They had maybe 5 before the Taliban could coordinate their fire and turn the valley floor into a killing field. Her second shot dropped a Taliban fighter who was setting up a rocket-propelled grenade launcher. The explosion of her Barrett rifle gave away her position, but it also announced to 30 Taliban fighters that death was watching them from the mountains. Through her scope, Sarah could see Alpha Team fighting with everything they had. Torres had found cover behind a large boulder and was laying down suppressive fire with his M4 carbine. Kim had positioned himself to protect the team's left flank, his rifle cracking steadily as he engaged targets on the ridge. The other 6 SEALs had spread out and were returning fire, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. Sarah's third shot came within seconds of her second, dropping a Taliban machine gunner who'd been raking Alpha Team's position with automatic fire. The fighter spun and fell, his weapon clattering down the mountainside. "Who the hell is that?" she heard Torres shout over the radio. "Someone's got our 6. "Unknown sniper, unknown position," Webb responded, his voice tight with concentration as he directed his team's defense. Don't look a gift horse in the mouth. Sarah was in her element now, her world reduced to the view through her scope and the steady rhythm of her breathing. She'd trained for this moment her entire adult life, the moment when her skills would mean the difference between life and death for American soldiers. Her fourth target was a Taliban commander trying to coordinate the attack from a position of cover. Sarah's bullet found him through a gap in the rocks no bigger than a man's fist, the shot so precise that the other fighters around him dove for cover, thinking they were being targeted by multiple snipers. The Taliban had planned this ambush perfectly, except for one thing they couldn't have anticipated: a sniper they didn't know existed, firing from a position they hadn't scouted, with skills that defied their understanding of what was possible. Alpha Team was fighting hard, but Sarah could see they were still in serious trouble. The Taliban had positioned fighters in a rough semicircle around the valley floor, and even with her interventions, Webb's team was still heavily outnumbered. She needed to do more than pick off individual targets. She needed to break the Taliban's will to fight. Sarah shifted her focus to a cluster of fighters who were trying to flank Alpha Team from the east. Her fifth shot dropped the lead fighter, and her sixth sent his companion diving for cover behind a boulder that wouldn't protect him from her angle. Her seventh shot proved that point definitively. Jesus Christ, Kim's voice crackled over the radio. Whoever you are, you just saved my ass. Sarah allowed herself a brief smile before acquiring her next target. A Taliban fighter with an RPG was trying to get close enough to Alpha Team's position to make a kill shot. Sarah's eighth shot ensured he never got the chance. The tide of the battle was starting to turn. The Taliban fighters had gone from confident attackers to confused defenders, unsure where death would strike next. Some were breaking cover to retreat. Others were firing wildly at positions where they thought Sarah might be hiding. But Sarah knew this was far from over. She'd identified at least 30 fighters at the start of the engagement, and she'd only eliminated 8. The Taliban commander, whoever he was, would be regrouping his forces and trying to figure out how to deal with the unknown sniper who'd disrupted his perfect ambush. Through her scope, she watched Alpha Team beginning to move toward better defensive positions. Webb was directing his men with hand signals, try to work them toward a cluster of large boulders that would provide better cover. It was a smart move, but it would expose them during the transition. Sarah provided cover fire, her shots carefully timed to keep Taliban heads down while Alpha Team moved. Her ninth shot dropped a fighter who'd been tracking Torres's movement. Her 10th sent another diving for cover just as he was about to fire on Kim. The sound of her rifle had become a steady drumbeat echoing off the mountain walls. Each shot precisely placed, each target carefully chosen. The Taliban fighters were learning to fear that sound, to associate it with sudden death from an impossible distance. Webb's voice crackled over the radio again. Unknown sniper. If you can hear this, Alpha Team sends their thanks. We're moving to defensive position Bravo. Need continued overwatch. Sarah couldn't respond, but she could continue doing what she did best. Her 11th shot eliminated a Taliban fighter who was trying to set up a mortar. Her 12th dropped his assistant before he could complete the setup. The morning sun was climbing higher now, burning off the last of the mist, and giving Sarah an even clearer view of the battlefield. What she saw concerned her. The Taliban weren't retreating. Instead, they seemed to be repositioning, pulling back from exposed positions, and consolidating into stronger defensive points. Someone was still directing them. Someone smart enough to recognize that they were being picked off by a world-class sniper. That someone would be looking for ways to neutralize Sarah's advantage, either by finding her position or by making it impossible for her to provide effective cover for Alpha Team. Sarah's 13th shot took out a Taliban fighter who'd been using a mirror to try to locate her position by catching the reflection off her scope. It was a clever tactic, but not clever enough. As she searched for her 14th target, Sarah's radio crackled with an update from command. All units, be advised that air support is still 15 minutes out. Alpha Team, can you hold position? Affirmative, Webb responded immediately. We've got an unknown friendly providing precision fires from the high ground. As long as our guardian angel keeps shooting straight, we can hold. Sarah felt a surge of pride at Webb's words, but she knew the situation was still precarious. 15 minutes might as well be 15 hours if the Taliban managed to coordinate another major assault. She needed to be more than just accurate. She needed to be devastating. Her 14th shot eliminated a Taliban sniper who'd been trying to zero in on Alpha Team's position from a concealed nest in the rocks. The fighter never saw the bullet coming. Sarah's shot fired from an angle he hadn't even considered possible. Through her scope, Sarah caught a glimpse of movement that made her adjust her entire tactical assessment. A group of Taliban fighters was moving along a ridgeline that would allow them to get behind Alpha Team's position. If they succeeded, Webb's men would be caught in a crossfire with no way out. Sarah's 15th shot dropped the lead fighter in that group, but she knew she needed to do more. The group was too large for her to eliminate before they reached their objective, and once they were in position, Alpha Team would be in serious trouble. She made a decision that went against every rule of sniper engagement. Instead of picking off individuals, Sarah began placing shots designed to trigger rock slides. Her intimate knowledge of mountain terrain told her exactly where to shoot to bring down loose rock and debris. Her 16th and 17th shots struck carefully chosen points on the ridge face above the moving Taliban fighters. The results were immediate and devastating. tons of rock came crashing down, blocking the path and trapping several fighters under the debris. Holy shit. Torres's voice exploded over the radio. Did you see that? Someone just brought half the mountain down on those bastards. Sarah was already seeking her next target when she noticed something that made her blood run cold. A new group of fighters was approaching from the north, moving with the disciplined precision that suggested they were better trained than the local Taliban. These weren't farmers with AK-47s. These were professional fighters, possibly foreign fighters or special Taliban units. Her 18th shot eliminated the point man of this new group, but Sarah could see that this was going to be a much more difficult engagement. These fighters moved with tactical awareness, using proper cover and concealment, advancing by fire and movement in a way that showed real military training. Alpha Team had noticed the new threat as well. Webb's voice over the radio was calm, but urgent. We've got professional-level fighters approaching from the north. These guys know what they're doing. Sarah's 19th shot wounded a fighter who immediately received proper first aid from his companions, another sign that she was dealing with trained soldiers rather than irregulars. Her 20th shot eliminated the medic treating him, sending a clear message that mercy would not be part of this engagement. The professional fighters responded by laying down disciplined suppressive fire while their companions maneuvered for better positions. Sarah found herself facing opponents who understood how to counter sniper fire, who moved unpredictably and used smoke grenades to obscure their movements. Her 21st shot had to be taken through a gap in the smoke, a moving target at maximum range. She let her target by exactly the right amount, her bullet finding the fighter just as he thought he'd reach safety. But Sarah knew the tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. Alpha Team was now facing coordinated assault from multiple directions by fighters who understood modern military tactics. Even with her continued support, the odds were becoming increasingly unfavorable. Her 22nd shot eliminated a fighter who was directing the coordinated assault, but she could see others moving to take his place. These weren't farmers defending their territory. These were professional soldiers executing a complex military operation. Sarah's mind raced through her options. She could continue picking off individual targets, but the professional fighters would eventually adapt to her tactics. She could attempt to relocate, but that would leave Alpha Team without Overwatch during the most critical phase of the battle. Or she could do something that went against every principle of sniper engagement. She could become the primary target, drawing the enemy's attention and firepower toward herself and away from Alpha Team. It was tactically insane and probably suicidal, but it might give Webb's team the breathing room they needed to survive until air support arrived. Sarah made her choice. Her 23rd shot was deliberately fired from a slightly different position, designed to reveal her general location to the enemy. Her 24th shot came from yet another angle, creating the impression that she was mobile and aggressive rather than hidden and defensive. The effect was immediate. The professional Taliban fighters began directing concentrated fire toward her position, their muzzle flashes giving away their locations for her countershots. Sarah's 25th shot eliminated one of these fighters, but she was now taking heavy return fire that forced her to keep moving between shots. Unknown sniper, break contact, and relocate. Webb's voice crackled urgently over the radio. You're drawing too much fire. But Sarah couldn't break contact, not yet. Alpha Team was using the distraction she created to improve their defensive positions, and she could see air support contrails beginning to appear on the horizon. She just needed to buy them a few more minutes. Her 26th shot came from behind a boulder that immediately began taking rifle and machine gun fire from multiple directions. Rock fragments showered her position as bullets sparked off stone, but her shot found its target, another professional fighter who'd been coordinating the assault on her position. Sarah was in the fight of her life now, moving constantly to avoid the increasing volume of fire directed at her position. Her 27th shot had to be taken while moving, a nearly impossible shot that she made look routine. Through her scope, she could see that her sacrifice was working. Alpha Team had managed to consolidate into a strong defensive position that would be much harder to overrun. Webb's men were laying down effective covering fire, and the Taliban assault was losing momentum as their attention became divided between two widely separated targets. Sarah's 28th shot eliminated a machine gunner who'd been pinning down Alpha Team's left flank. Her 29th shot wounded his assistant, who was immediately dragged to safety by his comrades. The sound of jet engines was growing louder now. Air support was finally approaching. Sarah just needed to hold on for another few minutes, continue providing the distraction that was keeping the Taliban from concentrating their full force on Alpha Team. Her 30th shot would be the most important shot of her life, and she hadn't even identified her target yet. Sarah's breathing slowed to the rhythm that had been drilled into her through thousands of hours of training. Through the chaos of gunfire and explosions, her world narrowed to the view through her scope. The 30th target had to be perfect, not just accurate, but devastating enough to break the Taliban's coordinated assault. She found him through the smoke and dust, a Taliban commander positioned behind a cluster of rocks, directing the professional fighters with hand signals and radio commands. He was the puppet master orchestrating the entire ambush, and he was protected by overlapping fields of fire from his subordinates. The shot required threading a bullet through a gap no wider than a coffee cup, at a range of over 1,400 meters, while taking heavy fire herself. It was the kind of shot that existed only in training scenarios and sniper legends. Sarah exhaled halfway and held her breath. The world went silent around her as she entered what snipers called the zone, that moment when time slowed and the entire universe contracted to the space between the crosshairs and the target. Her rifle bucked against her shoulder. Through her scope, she watched the Taliban commander's head snap back as her bullet found its mark with surgical precision. The effect on his fighters was immediate and profound. Without his coordinating voice, the disciplined assault dissolved into confused chaos. "Target down," Sarah whispered to herself, already seeking her 31st target. But as she swept her scope across the battlefield, something caught her attention that made her blood freeze. A new group of vehicles was approaching the valley from the east, 3 pickup trucks loaded with additional fighters. The ambush wasn't over, it was expanding. Alpha Team's radio crackled with Webb's urgent assessment. "We've got vehicle-borne hostiles approaching from the east. At least 20 additional fighters." Sarah could see what Webb couldn't from his position. These weren't just additional fighters. One of the trucks mounted a heavy machine gun that could tear Alpha Team apart in seconds if it reached an effective firing position. Another carried what looked like a recoilless rifle, a weapon capable of destroying their defensive position with a single shot. The jet engines were louder now, but Sarah knew air support was still minutes away. Alpha Team needed those vehicles stopped before they could deploy their heavy weapons. Sarah's 31st shot punched through the windshield of the lead truck, killing the driver instantly. The vehicle swerved off the mountain track and crashed into a boulder, blocking the path for the vehicles behind it. But the fighters in the truck bed jumped clear and immediately began setting up their heavy machine gun. Her 32nd shot eliminated the machine gunner before he could open fire, but Sarah knew she was fighting a losing battle. There were too many targets, too many weapons, and too many fighters streaming into the valley. Even her legendary marksmanship couldn't overcome such overwhelming odds. That's when she heard Webb's voice over the radio, calm and professional despite the desperate situation. "All Alpha personnel, prepare for emergency extraction. We're going to fight our way to Landing Zone Charlie." Sarah's heart sank. Landing Zone Charlie was 800 meters away across open ground that was now swarming with Taliban fighters. Alpha Team would have to fight through a gauntlet of enemies with no cover and limited ammunition. It was borderline suicidal, but it was their only option. Her 33rd shot dropped a Taliban fighter who was positioning himself to intercept Alpha Team's withdrawal route. Her 34th eliminated his partner. But for every fighter she killed, 2 more seemed to take his place. Through her scope, Sarah watched Alpha Team begin their desperate movement toward the landing zone. Torres led the way, his M4 carbine chattering as he laid down suppressive fire. Kim covered the team's left flank, while the other SEALs moved in practice formation, each man covering his teammates while advancing under fire. Sarah became their guardian angel, her shots precisely timed to clear threats from Alpha Team's path. Her 35th shot eliminated a sniper who had Webb in his crosshairs. Her 36th dropped a fighter with an RPG who was targeting the moving SEALs. But the Taliban were adapting to her tactics now. Some fighters were using smoke grenades to obscure her view, while others fired in her direction to keep her head down and disrupt her aim. Sarah found herself taking increasingly difficult shots through smoke, dust, and the haze of battle. Her 37th shot had to be taken blind, firing at a muzzle flash glimpse through the smoke. She heard the distinctive sound of her bullets striking flesh, confirming the hit even though she couldn't see her target fall. Alpha Team was halfway to the landing zone now, but they were taking heavy fire from multiple directions. Sarah could hear the strain in their voices over the radio as they called out targets and coordinated their movement. RPG, 2 o'clock, Torres shouted. I see him. Kim responded, his rifle cracking as he engaged the threat. Sarah's 38th shot took out a different RPG gunner who was targeting Alpha Team from a concealed position. The fighter spun and fell, his weapon clattering down the mountainside. But Sarah's position was becoming untenable. The Taliban had finally managed to triangulate her location based on her muzzle flashes, and multiple fighters were now directing concentrated fire at her rocky outcrop. Bullets sparked off stone around her, and she could hear the distinctive whistle of near misses passing over her head. She was forced to relocate, scrambling across the rocky terrain while carrying her heavy Barrett rifle and ammunition. It was a dangerous move that exposed her to enemy fire, but staying in her original position would have meant certain death. Sarah's 39th shot came from her new position, eliminating a Taliban spotter who was directing fire toward her old location. Her 40th shot dropped his radio operator, cutting off another node in the enemy's communication network. Through her scope, she could see Alpha Team was now within 300 meters of the landing zone, but they were facing the heaviest resistance yet. The Taliban commander might be dead, but his subordinates understood that preventing the American escape was their only chance to claim victory from this botched ambush. Sarah's 41st shot eliminated a machine gunner who was raking Alpha Team's position with automatic fire. Her 42nd shot took out a grenadier who was lobbing explosives toward the moving SEALs. That's when she heard the sound that changed everything, the distinctive whine of incoming artillery. Someone had called an indirect fire on the landing zone, probably mortars or rockets launched from positions too far away for Sarah to engage. Incoming. Webb's voice exploded over the radio. All Alpha personnel, take cover. The first explosion landed 50 meters short of Alpha Team's position, throwing up a geyser of dirt and rocks. The second was closer, and Sarah could see that the Taliban were walking their fire toward the landing zone with deadly precision. Alpha Team was caught in the open with nowhere to hide, and enemy fighters closing in from multiple directions. They needed immediate suppression of the mortar position, but that was beyond Sarah's capabilities from her current location. Or was it? Sarah had noticed earlier that one of the crashed vehicles was leaking fuel, creating a volatile pool that hadn't yet ignited. If she could create a large enough explosion at the right moment, it might provide the distraction Alpha Team needed to reach the landing zone. Her 43rd shot was aimed not at a human target, but at a spark plug visible in the crashed truck's exposed engine. The explosion was immediate and spectacular, sending a fireball 300 feet into the air and creating a massive smoke screen that obscured the entire eastern approach to the landing zone. The psychological effect on the Taliban fighters was even more important than the tactical advantage. Many of them had never seen such a massive explosion outside of an airstrike, and so began to retreat, thinking they were about to be hit by bombs from the approaching aircraft. Alpha Team used the confusion and cover to make their final sprint to the landing zone. Sarah provided overwatch, her shots now coming in rapid succession as she engaged any Taliban fighter who tried to pursue through the smoke. Her 44th shot dropped a fighter emerging from the smoke cloud with an AK-47. Her 45th eliminated his companion. Her 46th shot wounded a third fighter who immediately dove back into the concealment of the smoke. The sound of helicopter rotors was now audible over the chaos of battle. The extraction birds were approaching the landing zone, which meant Alpha Team had perhaps 2 minutes to secure the area and prepare for pickup. Sarah's 47th shot eliminated a Taliban fighter who was setting up a rocket-propelled grenade launcher within range of the landing zone. Her 48th shot took out his loader before he could pass another round. Through her scope, Sarah watched Alpha Team reach the landing zone and immediately began establishing a defensive perimeter. They moved with the precision of a unit that had trained together for years, each man knowing exactly where to position himself for maximum effectiveness. But the Taliban weren't giving up. Sarah could see fighters massing for what looked like a final assault on the landing zone, hoping to overrun Alpha Team before the helicopters could complete the extraction. Her 49th shot eliminated the leader of this assault force, a bearded fighter who was rallying his comrades with shouted commands. The effect was immediate. Without leadership, the assault lost its coordination and momentum. Sarah's 50th shot took advantage of the confusion, dropping another fighter who was trying to organize the remaining Taliban forces. But she knew this was far from over. There were still dozens of enemy fighters in the valley, and some of them were professional soldiers who wouldn't be easily discouraged. That's when she heard Webb's voice over the radio, calm and professional despite the chaos around him. Overwatch, this is Alpha Leader. We're in position for extraction, but we need continued sniper support. Can you maintain fires on our perimeter? Sarah couldn't respond directly, but she could certainly continue doing what she did best. Her 51st shot eliminated a Taliban fighter who was crawling through the rocks toward Alpha Team's defensive position. The helicopter rotors were much louder now, and Sarah could see the first Black Hawk approaching the landing zone through the smoke and dust. But she also noticed something that made her heart race. Several Taliban fighters had positioned themselves with man-portable air defense systems, shoulder-fired missiles capable of shooting down the rescue helicopter. Sarah's 52nd shot eliminated one of these missile operators, but she could see at least two more setting up their weapons in positions where they had clear shots at the incoming helicopter. Her 53rd shot wounded a second missile operator, but his assistant grabbed the weapon and continued the setup procedure. Sarah's 54th shot eliminated the assistant, but the wounded operator was still trying to complete his shot. The helicopter was now, in its final approach, completely vulnerable to missile attack. Sarah had perhaps 10 seconds to eliminate the remaining threat before the rescue mission became a catastrophe. Her 55th shot was the longest of the engagement, fired at a target over 1,600 meters away, through smoke, heat shimmer, and the rotor wash from the approaching helicopter. It was an impossible shot by any reasonable standard, threading the needle through conditions that would challenge the world's best snipers. Sarah's bullet found its target with surgical precision, striking the missile operator in the head just as he was about to pull the trigger. The man collapsed, his unfired missile clattering harmlessly down the mountainside. The Black Hawk touched down in the landing zone, its door gunners immediately laying down suppressive fire to cover Alpha Team's boarding. Sarah watched through her scope as Webb's men moved with practiced efficiency, covering each other as they ran to the helicopter. But the Taliban made one final attempt to prevent the extraction. A group of fighters charged directly toward the helicopter, firing wildly as they ran. It was a desperate, suicidal assault, but it was also dangerous to the rescue aircraft and the soldiers boarding it. Sarah's 56th shot dropped the lead fighter in this assault. Her 57th eliminated a second attacker. Her 58th shot wounded a third, who stumbled but continued his charge until Sarah's 59th shot ended his advance permanently. Alpha Team was aboard the helicopter now, but the aircraft was still vulnerable during its takeoff phase. Sarah continued to provide overwatch, her shots precisely placed to suppress any Taliban fighters who might threaten the ascending aircraft. Her 60th shot eliminated a sniper who was trying to target the helicopter's tail rotor. Her 61st shot dropped a fighter with an RPG who was attempting to track the aircraft's flight path. The Black Hawk cleared the valley rim and disappeared into the morning sky, carrying Alpha Team to safety. Sarah allowed herself a moment of satisfaction, watching the aircraft disappear into the distance with 8 American soldiers who would live to fight another day because of her intervention. But her own situation was far from resolved. The Taliban now knew approximately where she was positioned, and without the distraction of Alpha Team's extraction, they would be focusing all their attention on hunting her down. Sarah's 62nd shot eliminated a Taliban fighter who was trying to climb toward her position. Her 63rd shot dropped his partner, but she could see more fighters moving through the rocks below her, and she knew her time in this position was running out. The smart tactical decision would be to withdraw immediately, to disappear into the mountains and extract through one of several predetermined routes. But as Sarah scanned the valley through her scope, she realized she had an opportunity to do something that went far beyond her original mission parameters. The Taliban had committed significant resources to this ambush, including professional fighters and heavy weapons that represented a major threat to future coalition operations. With most of these forces concentrated in one location and disorganized by their failed ambush, Sarah could potentially eliminate a substantial portion of their combat capability in a single engagement. It was dangerous, probably reckless, and definitely outside her authority. But it was also an opportunity that might not come again, the chance to strike a blow against the enemy that would resonate throughout their organization. Sarah made her decision. Instead of withdrawing, she would continue the fight. Sarah Chun had crossed a line that most snipers never approached, the boundary between tactical support and single-handed warfare. With Alpha Team safely extracted, she was now alone in hostile territory, surrounded by an unknown number of Taliban fighters who were actively hunting her. Any reasonable person would have begun immediate withdrawal to a safe extraction point. But Sarah wasn't thinking like a reasonable person. She was thinking like a weapon. Through her scope, she could see the Taliban forces below beginning to reorganize after the chaos of the failed ambush. Professional fighters were taking command of the scattered, irregular forces, establishing new defensive positions and planning their next move. They had taken significant casualties, but they still represented a substantial threat to future coalition operations. Sarah's 64th shot eliminated a Taliban sergeant who was organizing a search team to hunt for her position. The man dropped instantly, his radio clattering down the rocky slope. The psychological effect on his subordinates was immediate. They dove for cover, suddenly aware that death was still watching them from the mountains. But Sarah knew that staying in her current position was tactical suicide. She needed to relocate before the Taliban could coordinate effective countermeasures against her. Moving while carrying her Barrett rifle and ammunition was dangerous and exhausting, but it was the only way to maintain her tactical advantage. She began a careful withdrawal to a secondary position she'd identified earlier, a rocky outcrop 800 meters to the north that offered excellent fields of fire over the entire valley. The movement required crossing open ground that would expose her to enemy observation, but Sarah had trained for this scenario countless times. Sarah's 65th shot came during her movement, fired at a Taliban spotter who had caught a glimpse of her repositioning. The shot was taken while she was partially exposed on a mountainside, her rifle braced against a boulder for stability. The bullet found its target at 900 meters, eliminating the threat before he could alert his comrades to her new position. The relocation took 20 minutes of careful movement through terrain that would challenge an experienced mountaineer. Sarah moved in short rushes between patches of cover, constantly scanning for threats while managing her heavy equipment. By the time she reached her new position, she was breathing hard and sweating despite the cool mountain air. But the new position was worth the risk. From her elevated vantage point, Sarah could see the entire valley and the surrounding ridges. More importantly, she could see something that made her blood run cold. The Taliban weren't just reorganizing their existing forces. They were being reinforced. A convoy of 4 vehicles was approaching from the south, loaded with additional fighters and what appeared to be heavier weapons. Sarah counted at least 30 fresh fighters dismounting from the vehicles, including several who moved with a disciplined precision that marked them as foreign fighters or elite Taliban units. These weren't local farmers with AK-47s. These were professional soldiers with modern equipment and sophisticated tactics. They immediately began establishing a command post and deploying their forces with military precision that suggested extensive training. Sarah's 66th shot eliminated the apparent leader of this new force, a bearded man in clean fatigues who was directing the deployment with hand signals. Her bullet struck him center mass at a range of 1,300 meters, dropping him instantly and throwing the new arrivals into confusion. But the confusion was brief. Within minutes, a new leader emerged and began reorganizing the force. These fighters adapted quickly to the threat, using proper tactical movement and communication procedures as they spread out across the valley floor. Sarah's 67th shot eliminated a radio operator who was coordinating between the different Taliban elements. Her 68th shot dropped a heavy weapons specialist who was setting up what appeared to be a mortar system. Through her scope, Sarah could see the Taliban forces beginning a systematic search of the mountains, moving in coordinated teams that covered each other's advance. They were no longer the disorganized rabble from earlier in the day. Someone with real military training was directing their operations. Her 69th shot eliminated a team leader who was directing one of these search parties. The effect was immediate. His team took cover and began calling for support, disrupting their advance and buying Sarah precious time. But Sarah knew she was fighting a losing battle against time and numbers. Even with her exceptional skills, she couldn't eliminate 30-plus professional fighters before they managed to locate and overwhelm her position. She needed to change the tactical dynamic of the engagement. That's when she noticed something interesting about the Taliban's deployment pattern. They were concentrating their forces around what they assumed was her most likely position, the rocky outcrop where she'd been firing earlier. They were methodically searching the area with overwhelming force, confident that they would eventually flush her out. But they were searching the wrong mountain. Sarah's new position offered her something the Taliban couldn't have anticipated: a clear line of sight to their ammunition and fuel supplies. The vehicles they'd arrived in were parked in what they thought was a safe area, guarded by only a few fighters who were more concerned with watching the mountains than protecting their rear. Sarah's 70th shot was aimed not at a person, but at a fuel tank on one of the parked vehicles. The explosion was immediate and spectacular, sending flames and debris high into the air while eliminating the vehicle and its cargo of ammunition. The psychological effect was even more devastating than the tactical damage. The Taliban fighters had thought their supply area was safe from the mysterious sniper who had been terrorizing them all morning. Suddenly, nowhere was safe. Her 71st shot ignited another vehicle, creating a second massive explosion that sent the Taliban guards scrambling for cover. Within minutes, half their transportation and a significant portion of their ammunition had been destroyed. But Sarah's aggressive tactics came with a cost. The muzzle flashes from her shots had finally given the Taliban a clear indication of her actual position. She could see search teams beginning to move in her direction, advancing with the tactical discipline that marked them as dangerous opponents. Sarah's 72nd shot eliminated the point man of the nearest search team, dropping him at 800 meters as he attempted to climb toward her position. Her 73rd shot wounded his backup, who immediately received medical attention from his comrades. These fighters knew how to deal with sniper threats. They moved in teams that provided mutual support, used proper spacing to minimize casualties from single shots, and employed suppressive fire to disrupt her aim. Sarah found herself facing opponents who understood modern military tactics. Her 74th shot had to be taken while she was receiving return fire from multiple directions. Bullets sparked off rocks around her position as she lined up her shot, but years of training under pressure served her well. Her bullet found its target, a Taliban fighter who was directing fire against her position. But Sarah knew her time in this location was running out. The Taliban teams were getting closer, and their suppressive fire was becoming more accurate and coordinated. She needed to relocate again, but this time there might not be another perfect position available. That's when she heard something that changed everything: the distant sound of helicopter rotors approaching from the north. But these weren't extraction birds coming for her. Through her scope, she could see Taliban fighters pointing excitedly toward the approaching aircraft and setting up what appeared to be anti-aircraft weapons. Sarah realized with growing alarm that another coalition unit was approaching the valley, probably drawn by the sounds of battle or responding to intelligence about the Taliban concentration. But they were flying directly into a trap the Taliban had learned from their earlier failure and were now prepared to deal with coalition air power. Her 75th shot eliminated a Taliban fighter who was setting up a shoulder-fired missile system. Her 76th shot dropped his assistant before he could complete the weapon setup. But Sarah could see at least 3 more anti-aircraft teams preparing to engage the approaching helicopters. The coalition aircraft were flying into a kill zone without knowing it, and she was the only person in position to do something about it. Sarah's 77th shot eliminated another missile operator, but she knew she couldn't neutralize all the threats in time. The helicopters were less than 2 minutes away from entering the engagement envelope of the Taliban's anti-aircraft weapons. That's when Sarah made a decision that violated every principle of sniper employment. She began firing rapidly at multiple targets, sacrificing precision for speed in an attempt to disrupt as many anti-aircraft positions as possible before the helicopters arrived. Her 78th shot wounded a missile operator. Her 79th shot eliminated his loader. Her 80th shot forced another team to take cover just as they were preparing to fire. The helicopters were clearly visible now. 2 Apache attack helicopters approaching the valley at low altitude, their pilots unaware of the welcome waiting for them below. Sarah could see Taliban fighters tracking their approach with weapons that could bring them down with a single hit. Sarah's 81st shot eliminated another missile operator, but she could see that one Taliban team had successfully acquired a lock on the lead Apache. The shoulder-fired missile was armed and ready to fire, and she had perhaps 5 seconds before the coalition aircraft became a fireball in the sky. Her 82nd shot was the most important of her military career. A desperation shot fired at a target moving to engage friendly aircraft, taken at extreme range under heavy fire while she was partially exposed on a mountainside. The bullet struck the missile operator in the shoulder just as he pulled the trigger, throwing off his aim enough that the missile streaked harmlessly past the Apache and exploded against the mountainside. The coalition aircraft was saved by a margin measured in inches. But Sarah's exposed shooting position had finally given the Taliban search teams a clear target. She could hear bullets whistling past her head and cracking off the rocks around her as multiple teams converged on her location. Her 83rd shot eliminated a Taliban fighter who had gotten dangerously close to her position, dropping him at less than 200 meters. Her 84th shot wounded another fighter who immediately called for medical assistance. The Apache helicopters had finally realized they were under attack and began engaging the Taliban positions with their 30mm cannons and Hellfire missiles. The sound of their weapons was deafening, and the effect on the Taliban forces was immediate and devastating. But Sarah knew the Apache pilots couldn't distinguish between Taliban positions and her own location. She was in serious danger of being engaged by friendly fire as the attack helicopters systematically destroyed every fighting position in the valley. Her 85th shot eliminated a Taliban fighter who was trying to signal her position to the Apache pilots, probably hoping to trick them into engaging her with their superior firepower. It was a clever tactic that might have worked if Sarah hadn't been watching for exactly that kind of deception. The sound of the Apache's weapons was now constant as they methodically engaged Taliban positions throughout the valley. Sarah could see fighters running in panic as 30mm rounds chewed up their defensive positions and Hellfire missiles eliminated their heavy weapons. But the attack helicopter's presence also created new dangers for Sarah. She was now caught between Taliban forces trying to kill her and coalition aircraft that might mistake her for an enemy combatant. Any movement could draw fire from either side. Sarah's 86th shot eliminated a Taliban sniper who had been trying to target the Apache pilots. Her 87th shot dropped another fighter who was attempting to coordinate ground fire against the helicopters. Through her scope, Sarah could see the tide of battle turning decisively in favor of the coalition forces. The Taliban fighters who weren't being destroyed by Apache fire were beginning to retreat from the valley, abandoning their positions and equipment as they fled into the mountains. But a core group of professional fighters remained, and they were now focused entirely on eliminating Sarah before making their own escape. She could see them moving through the rocks below her position, advancing with tactical discipline despite the chaos around them. Sarah's 88th shot eliminated their apparent leader, a man who was directing their advance with hand signals. Her 89th shot wounded another fighter, but the remaining Taliban continued their assault on her position. The irony wasn't lost on Sarah. She had called in coalition air power to save American soldiers, and now that same air power was providing cover for Taliban fighters trying to kill her. The Apache pilots couldn't risk engaging targets so close to her position without risking friendly fire. Sarah's 90th shot eliminated another Taliban fighter climbing toward her position. But she could see that the remaining enemies were getting closer, and her ammunition was running dangerously low. She had perhaps 10 rounds left in her current magazine and 2 spare magazines in her pack. That's when she heard a voice over her radio that she hadn't expected. Clear English with an American accent. "Unknown sniper, this is Apache lead. We've been monitoring your fire all morning. Outstanding shooting, soldier. Can you mark your position for extraction?" For the first time in hours, Sarah allowed herself to hope that she might survive this engagement.